Welcome to the Carlos G Figueroa Foundation's Homeless in Tucson series. If you watched our first video, which was Homeless in Tucson, Gracie, and you were introduced to a homeless lady that is disabled, she lives in a camp, and she also is in a wheelchair. All right. If you watch that, then what is about to occur here with this particular scope will be familiar to you. I'm Ron Austin. I'm Vice President of the Carlos G Figueroa Foundation, and I'm going to introduce you to Diana Figueroa, who is the President of the Carlos G Figueroa Foundation, and she is going to address the issue of housing for homeless women in Tucson, and you will learn quite a few things.
Okay.
Diana, you're live.
Hello.
Okay. This lady that you see right now is Diana Figueroa. She is president of the Carlos G Figueroa Foundation, and she's going to address some of the issues in Tucson with homeless women and housing. So, Diana, I think we both know that there's not many facilities for women in Tucson that are homeless that have not been abused. Is that correct?
That's correct. Shelter for women here is very scarce. If you haven't either been a victim of domestic violence, or if you're not accompanied by a child. So for a woman to be able to drop into a shelter like the men do here. So for example, there are many shelters here where a man can call in and reserve a bed, or show up and stand in line at 2:30 in the afternoon to get into a shelter. It's rare that a female can do that, unless of course she has already gone through the intake process because, you know, she's a victim of domestic violence or has children with her. So where do a lot of these women go? They end up having to sleep in the Santa Cruz River, or they go to a camp with people that they're familiar with. And the lengths that they have to go to protect themselves, I know a lot of women that have lived on the streets, some that are still living out there, others that are in recovery now, and the things that they told me that they had to do to survive out on the streets. Some would fake and call in and say that they were a victim of domestic violence, and I'll be the first to say I was guilty of sometimes telling women, because it was either a really cold night or it was detrimental to their health for them to be out for whatever circumstances. And we had to kind of say, well, you know, maybe that's the route that they had to take. And, you know, you don't want to encourage people to lie, but if it meant that they needed to get out of a dangerous situation, then they would have to go that route and say, you know what, I am maybe not necessarily a domestic situation, but they were in fear for their lives for other reasons, and so they would have to say different stories just to get themselves help. So they would get themselves into the domestic violence shelter. So it's very, very sad to see that we don't have a 100-bed facility for women just to go and get shelter from the elements. It can get really hot here, and there are nights, believe it or not, in Tucson where it can get really, really cold as well. We do have Operation Deep Freeze. We do have shelters during the winter time. I believe it's between November, usually February, but the temperatures have to drop below a certain temperature. So I believe it's 32 degrees, or with rain, it's 35 or 36 degrees or something. But again, in Tucson, how often does that happen, especially if we're having a dry winter? Um, so it kind of plays on the other side too. I wrote an essay for one of my classes one time about men that have a hard time, single dads getting into shelters that have children. So it goes both ways. I understand that, but to be able to provide a big shelter, like one of the shelters that we have here in Tucson, that has 100 beds for men that are unaccompanied and that are not victims of domestic violence. Where's the fairness in that for the women? They too need the help. Not all women have children. Not all women are victims of domestic violence. So,
And some of those women are disabled also.
oh, absolutely. We have a lot of women that are disabled. They have different illnesses. A lot of them are suffering from physical disabilities, mental illness, that they're not able to care for themselves. And in a lot of the shelters too, you have to be self-sufficient. Some shelters, they say, oh, we have a med bed, but if you're not able to care for yourself, and you really don't qualify to stay in a hospital, but you really don't qualify to stay in the shelter either, because you have to be out on the streets during a certain amount of time. So, you wake up in the morning at 7 o'clock, you're out the door, and you can't come back until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Where are they supposed to spend their time during those hours? Especially if they're ill. They can't be at the hospital. So those are big concerns that we have here, especially if they're vulnerable. And if they're vulnerable, and let's say there's a predator out there that sees them vulnerable, the links that I was talking about that women have shared with me have been some women dressed like men. Some women have told me that they wear big, baggy clothing, baseball hats. They will do anything that they can to not look feminine, so that they are not targeted and they're not preyed upon. Anything else? I mean, do you have any other questions, Ron? Or how?
Well, okay, so there's an element of predation in the streets when a woman is staying in a camp. Can you address some of those issues that have occurred that you know of, that have occurred to certain women that you've come in contact with that are homeless?
There's a huge. There's somebody that comes to mind from years ago that she still haunts me to this day. Back in 2007 or 2008, there was a woman. She was undocumented, and she was staying in a camp with a couple of the guys that I knew, and the guys protected her. Before that, she had been staying under the bridge, but had been kicked and beaten and raped by a man that was supposedly helping her, and he had demanded money for her protection, for him to protect her, but he ended up robbing her. And so it was hard for her to trust anybody. But then she came across this other group of guys, and it's funny because this group of guys used to actually, they were old friends of my dad's. And the man that came to me and told me that he had her at his camp, he's now, since he's passed as well. But when he told me that he had her at the camp, I thought, okay, these guys, they were a good group of guys. And I knew that they were going to take care of her. But when he brought her to my office, she was just terrified. And the look of fear in her eye, I mean, she just wanted to work. And when I tried to ask her questions so I could get her help and get her resources, she was so timid. She was scared. She was shaking, and she was just so fearful. She didn't want to open her mouth. She didn't want anybody to know that she was here. She was afraid that man was going to find her. And I remember she lifted up her shirt and she showed me the bruise on her ribs, on her belly, and it was a boot print from where he had kicked her. And she had markings on her arm from where he had grabbed her. And she said, this is why I can't be out there on the streets, but I have nowhere to go. I don't have a child. I can't get into a family shelter. And plus, I'm undocumented. If I get caught here, there's nowhere I can go without being reported. So there's the other end of it too, is, you know, being undocumented, being a single woman, and trying to get into a shelter. So that's a whole other topic there.
Isn't it true that quite a number of homeless women in the street, that live in the street, they will hook up with a man that not necessarily that they particularly care for, and just for the protection of herself?
Oh yeah, definitely. But at a high cost. There's a price that comes along with that. A lot of women will turn to a man and you know, and they've shared their stories with me. They offer their protection. You stick by me, baby, and I'll take care of you. But it doesn't come without a price. They pay the price, whether it's through sexual favors. They end up getting pimped out on the streets. They end up having to sell drugs for them. They end up being mules. So it's definitely not without a price. They are getting the protection of these men, but they have to exchange something for it. Nothing in life is free.
I want to welcome the Periscope, YouTube, and Facebook viewers to this series, the Homeless in Tucson series. Today we're speaking with Diana Figueroa. She's president of the Carlos G Figueroa Foundation, and she is addressing and commenting on the situation in Tucson, whereas women who are homeless and live on the street, and because there's not any housing for women that are not abused. And I know there's just a few of you watching this series right now, and if you like what we're trying to do here, and if you feel that it's a worthwhile endeavor, please give us some hearts, please, because I understand that the hearts gives us a better ranking within Periscope. And if you haven't seen the first video, Homeless in Tucson, Gracie, in which we interviewed a lady who is homeless and is disabled and in a wheelchair and lives in a camp. If you haven't seen that video, you can watch it on YouTube if you search for Ron Austin. No space between Ron and Austin. If you search for Ron Austin, you will come up on the Homeless in Tucson Gracie video, which we did. In addition, tomorrow, Monday at 8 a.m., approximately 8 a.m., between 8 and 9, we will be interviewing Gracie again at the church that she goes to, and she also volunteers there, Southside Presbyterian Church. And we'll also be interviewing some other people that know her there, so you can get a better insight into the person that she is. So this issue with Diana, this issue with homeless women not having been abused, not being able to get housing in Tucson, is this just a local thing, or is...
Oh no, this is something that happens worldwide. I'm sure, I don't know the statistics and the resources that are available in other countries, but across the nation, like I said, when I was writing that essay looking for shelters for men who were looking for shelters that were men of domestic there were victims, male victims of domestic violence, and where they could take their children to seek safety. I found maybe 3 or 4 shelters across the nation that would actually accept men only if they had children that were under, I think, 14 years old. So in researching for women, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it's out there. I mean, it's a huge problem across the nation. We are grateful for the services for women who are able to get help, that are victims of domestic violence and who do have children they have a place to go to. I think we need more of that help too for them as well. But we really need to push for shelters for women that are unaccompanied and not victims of domestic violence.
Okay. Well, thank you, Diana, for your expertise and for your understanding and communicating with women who are homeless. I want to thank the people who have been watching this particular series, Homeless in Tucson series, for watching. And if I know that the Periscope only keeps the video for 24 hours. And if you want someone else to see the video, if you want to watch it again, you can watch it on YouTube, possibly this evening or maybe tomorrow morning. I will post it up on YouTube, and it is Homeless in Tucson. Diana Figueroa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.